The NFL just reached a $765 million settlement with former players and their families over concussion-related injuries. But is this more of a win for the league or the players?
Well, here to discuss the case and its implications is managing attorney at Romano Law, Domenic Romano. Domenic, thank you for being here.
Okay, Domenic, we wanted you to break this down for us because 4,500 retired players filed this lawsuit claiming that the league actually knew about some of the dangers of head trauma but did not share it with them. So how big of a case is this for the industry, for us, for the players?
It was huge. It was a huge concern among observers how much the settlement would be. Some had estimated that it would be $5 billion, some as high as $10 billion. This is really a remarkable amount. It's a huge win for the league. In the size is a lot lower than some had anticipated.
Now, they settled for $765 million, but experts say that they could have walked away with a lot more. So why did the plaintiff settle for such a small amount?
Well, that's an excellent question. Put in context, what does this mean? How much is $765 million for the NFL? Well,
it's a $10 billion industry.
Exactly.
That's a drop in the bucket.
Completely. 2 years ago, one franchise, the Jacksonville Jaguars, sold for close to that exact same amount. And now, arguably, according to Forbes, it's worth considerably more. That franchise is worth over $800 million. So why would the players settle, getting back to your question? Well, it's money now. It's money certain. Okay, if they had gone to arbitration, and it was looking like it was going that way, it could have been appealed. It could have been 2018 or beyond before some of these players got money. Plus, they would have had to show causation, which means they would have had to show that their injuries came directly from them playing in the NFL. You mentioned before that maybe they didn't take proper steps in informing, the rule changes came late, and things of that effect. Some of them played in other leagues. They played college football. They played in the CFL up in Canada. So this way, the players don't have to show causation. If they have some neurological damage, if the tests show, that they'll be eligible for part of that settlement money.
Well, who is eligible to get a payday out of this, and how will the money be split up?
Good question. So all players that are currently retired, not just the 4,500 that sued, but any player of the 18,000 current retirees are eligible. So here's how the money breaks down. You've got, of the total amount, $75 million will go towards baseline testing to see who's eligible and who's not.
Okay.
$10 million will go to research and education. $4 million will go to informing the players, the eligible players, of what their abilities are to collect, and $1 million will just go to administrative expenses. What does that leave us with? About $675 million to be divided up by the players. Now, what does that mean? Is it divided equally? No, it's not.
So how do they determine who walks away with what amount of money?
And we're talking about 18,000 people that could potentially get a payday from this.
Right. So according to the way it's currently set up, the most that a player or their family can get is $5 million. That's for the most serious.
So that's the cap.
Exactly. So Alzheimer's, very serious neurological disorders. $4 million for certain others. Players that have died, $4 million will go to their family. Brain trauma, deaths from brain trauma, and on down. Now, here's how the money's dispersed. It's dispersed over 20 years. The details aren't clear whether it will be adjusted for inflation. Half of it will come within the first 3 years. Remember, if the players had to litigate, it could have been more than 3 years before they got a penny. But they're getting 50% of it right now. Okay. The other 50% over the next 17 years.
But that's not for anybody who's currently playing. So they're just out of luck.
Great point. Not necessarily. So even players that are retired, they can choose to opt out. They can get the settlement, so they don't have to show causation. They don't have to show that their injuries directly were related to playing in the NFL. But if they choose to opt out, they can initiate a separate suit against the NFL. And also, current players, of course, are free to do so as well.
So this suit doesn't preclude other players from suing the league, but they would have to do it individually.
Correct.
And they would have to opt out of this settlement.
Right.
So they would have to walk away with nothing in the hopes of gaining more.
Yes. So at the end of the day, even though it is a good PR win and a saving for the NFL compared to what it could have been, and good for the players, neither side made out like a bandit. The NFL is not completely in the clear, and the issue goes on. It's going to be interesting to see how they respond.
Well, will this in any way influence the way the game is played?
I would think so.
Okay.
Over time, I think we're going to see more rule changes and a more conservative approach to way concussions
played.
yes,
And
the way
maybe even the way these helmets are constructed.
Absolutely. Great point.
Already, some of the rules are starting to be changed with the fact that they say that if someone is coming at a player, they can't put their head down and put their helmet into their sternum, because then that's causing more injuries to them. So it's already having some sort of domino effect, right?
Yes, and I predict that we will continue to see these adjustments going forward.
Why do you think it took so long for the NFL to admit that this was a reality?
Money and business.
Money and business.
And frankly, the public. I mean, everyone's responsible, right? They want to see the game the old-fashioned way. Unfortunately, the old-fashioned way, we're coming to discover, is fraught with serious consequences.
Well, then you have to have that thought in the back of your mind that says, well, the players had to know what they were getting into. This is football, for crying out loud. They know it's a tough sport. There's a lot of tackling. There's a lot of hits. That there's going to be some type of injury.
Yes, that's true, and there's some voluntary assumption of risk there. However, at the same time, the NFL has enormous clout, right? They set the rules, they have the research, they commission the doctors for the teams,
Right.
and so could they have done more? That's the question that the lawsuit was aimed at.
And then people also say that although the league is giving the money, they're still really not owning up to what really happened and their information. Because we have a quote from the NFL that said, "This agreement lets us help those who need it most and continue our work and make the game safer for current and future players," but they did not own up to the problem.
You're absolutely right. Part of the win for the NFL is they got to avoid admitting culpability. That's
Right.
part of the settlement.
But if there's no accountability, then it really isn't a victory for the players, is it? I mean, they walk away with some money, but not nearly as much as they could have received. They didn't get an apology from the NFL or any acknowledgement that there is a direct correlation between head trauma and the way the game is played. So really, it just seems
But the
like
key word
the
that you mentioned
NFL
there is
just
could.
won.
The key word that you mentioned is could. They could have got more money. A lot more legal fees involved, many more years potentially waiting. And hey, they would have had to show, in a court of law, you have to show that this caused that in order to get
Would that have
money.
been impossible?
It would have been a pretty high bar to establish.
And since they've come up with a settlement in this case, does this open the league to getting sued for other things like knee injuries or back pain or other issues?
Yes, potentially yes. So this is not, they're not, off in the clear here.
Right.
They made
So
themselves a little bit more vulnerable now.
They still have to be careful of how they react to player injuries
What about
and
other
exposure.
sports, violent sports like boxing, for example?
And soccer.
And hockey,
And
where
hockey,
you have
yeah. Exactly.
a lot of high-speed collisions going on.
Could we potentially see similar suits in those respective, sports
That is an
fields?
excellent question. I think we very well may see similar adjustments, rule changes, and proactive, maybe preemptive measures in other sports, getting together leagues and unions trying to hammer out agreements.
Well, a lot of the plaintiffs in this case have said that they didn't really want to hurt the NFL or the league. They just wanted to bring awareness to, how serious of an issue concussions can be. But do you think this has already had a negative influence or made people look at the NFL differently?
I think it's brought awareness to the issue. The amount of money here, for most people, like we were saying, okay, it's a small amount of money for the NFL, but the general public reads that the NFL is paying over $765 million
Right.
to players. People understand, it's underscored, this is serious. And I think we're going to see a heightened level of awareness right across the board here.
So what's next for the players? How long will it take for them to see their money, and what happens next in order for that to take place?
Next is the medical examinations and the testing.
Oh.
And the league, I think it's in the league's interest to go on and to continue with the PR victory, just to pay out as soon as administratively possible and to start helping some of these players.
But are the medical exams being conducted by the NFL doctors or by independent doctors?
Independent doctors.
Okay.
And I should say,
that's very important.
yes, the judge, it looks like this will be approved within the next 30, but technically it hasn't been approved yet. It's been agreed to. Ultimately, the judge will ratify the decision or the agreement, the term sheet that the officials have come up with.
And although they have to go through a medical examination, they don't have to prove that those conditions actually happened on the field, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's part of the big win for the players.
Right, gotcha.
They have a neurological impediment, they have that disorder, they're entitled to some money.
Okay.
All right, well, I'm glad they're shining light on this because I don't think a lot of people realize a lot of the times how serious this condition can be and how people just don't have memories, can't do simple functions
It's very
because
sad
of playing
in
football.
a lot of cases, you're right.
Wow. All right, well, thank you so much for bringing light to this case and helping clear everything up for us.
Thank
It's
you.
a pleasure. Thank you.
You're watching Arise Entertainment 360.